Do you need to click? You don't need.
No need. Thank you very much, Jasper. What Jasper did not say maybe is today is the highlight. Because we are going to break lots of social media records today, we'd love you to tweet, bring down the Wi-Fi. Sorry, Jasper. Make the internet crash. Today we have a fantastic program, digital marketing, brands. This is all about making content that matters. That's what everybody's talking to us about. At Ogilvy, that's what brands are challenged with. With social media, the proliferation of platforms, ways of communicating with consumers, brands are being very challenged with ramping up the speed of production to something that is much faster than they've ever done and a very different way than they've ever done. It needs to be good. It needs to be fast. It also needs to be engaging. We are no longer in a world of broadcast. In order to bring you through that today, we've got a fantastic lineup, including some great platforms on which content is being shared, some very emergent new platforms, Emmy award-winning producers of content with proven track records on the more traditional side, some YouTube stars who have grown up in the environment, know how to do it natively, and we've got some great brands that are able to do it themselves, great examples. They'll be having very frank discussions about what are the challenges, how does it work, what has worked in the past, how are we going to have to adapt going forward, and a lot of interesting tools that will help you to understand how social works and how you can best do it. An example before of Hootsuite at the very beginning. So to kick it off this morning, very pleased to have an extremely interesting platform that has really been revolutionizing in a way the market research area. And we're really great to have Dave Goldberg, who is the CEO of SurveyMonkey, come and join us for our opening discussion here. Dave, it's good to have that pause. And actually,
Exactly.
welcome.
A dramatic pause there, yes. All right.
So Dave, what I'd like to start off discussing, first of all, we've done some very interesting research with SurveyMonkey, which we'll be showing in a moment, across 6 Asian countries about the reasons people are sharing content and the types of content they're sharing. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about a challenge that Dave set to me without knowing it. A few weeks ago, when we were figuring out what we were going to talk about, the angle on it, I was trying to understand SurveyMonkey, what makes it work, how does it go? And actually, it's backstage here, something that took me a long time to find in Hong Kong, which was a copy of a book that's not actually for sale, not Kindle, thank you. You made me get a traditional paper book, and I actually had to get it from a library. Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, which seems to me, having read parts of it, I confess, not the whole book yet, it sort of gives an intellectual foundation for what you're doing at SurveyMonkey.
Yeah, and I think so. The reason we gave you this challenge, and it's great to be here, by the way. Although I have to say, it's not good to follow the band. You want to be before the band, not after. For those of you the Spinal Tap fans, Spinal Tap then Puppets. I mean, I definitely want to be the before. But the book, I think, is very resonant for what people are thinking about today in social, and that's why we suggested that it be a topic. So
well, first of all, this book was written last year, year before last?
Like 50 years ago.
50-year-old book.
Which is why it was a little hard to find. But it still has a lot of resonance, and the basics of it are pretty simple. If you think about consumers, and they want to tell you something about your product, there's sort of 2 ways they do that. One is, if they're unhappy, for example, they stop buying your product, and they just sort of disappear over time. And the other thing they do when they're unhappy about something is they speak up. And so that's exit and voice. And you want voice. Although sometimes when you're having voice, you might feel like you don't want it. But in general, voice allows you to understand why people are unhappy, allows you to make changes, allows you to respond to those complaints, allows you to sort of adapt yourself to what's changing or what you've changed. And so the classic example of this is, someone changes the box of cereal formulation and their sales sort of slowly degrade, but no one says anything, no one speaks up. And vice versa, when 20 some years ago, Coca-Cola decided to change the formulation of Coke, and in the US was New Coke. People got outraged. How could they do this? How could they? And they spoke up, and Coke listened, and they went back, and they made changes. And this is long before social media, but it had the same impact. Social media helps amplify that, but the idea is still resonant today. And you want to encourage voice.
Yeah, so the three concepts: exit, voice, and loyalty.
And the difference
somebody
is,
look it up. Please share it on Twitter.
the difference between which people choose between exit and voice is loyalty.
Right, and you're not going to bother talking about a brand you're not loyal to.
You don't care about, yeah. And so, what does that mean for social? I think that means, we tend to somewhat think of social, and we're still very early on in the use of social, but we tend to think about it like other web mediums where we're going to just push content to people. And I think that's the wrong approach. I think that what we need to be doing in social is encouraging people to speak up. And people talk about conversation starters and all those sort of things, but a lot of what's done today as social marketing is pushing stuff at people. And we think what you really want to do is ask people questions.
Prompt them. What you want to do is force voice to come out.
Correct, yeah. And obviously it's better if you're starting from a place of loyalty where you've got customers who are really loyal to your brand that are going to sort of start those conversations. But even if you don't, just the process of asking a question or a series of questions shows you care.
And one of the reasons that I would urge people read the book is it comes back to not just looking at it in terms of marketing, or certainly doesn't look at it in terms of social media. This is a pre-internet book. But it looks at it in terms of governments. It looks at it in terms of major institutions, and the way in which this sort of reflexive bounce back situation empowers the ability to be able to get things done.
Yeah, more voice means things get changed, things get fixed, things progress. Progress happens, and it's not just in companies, you're right. I read it actually in my political philosophy class in college, so that was the context of it. But I do think that it is very applicable to thinking about what kind of behavior are your consumers taking, and what are you doing to encourage the right behavior? How are you building loyalty? How are you building voice? How are you measuring?
In other words, you're prompting them to engage.
Yeah, and
so it's certainly not about broadcast in the sense of sending a message out, but even then relating this to SurveyMonkey in the sense that your principle is getting people to respond.
Yeah, we talk about our mission being to help people make better decisions with data. That's what our mission is. But it's a very broad mission. And part of what we suggest people do, particularly in social, is just the notion of asking those questions and starting the conversation shows you care. Then the next step is, okay, show people you listened. So sometimes what you need to do is then push back the information that they've shared with you through a survey or through even some simple polls, but push that information back to them. So that's kind of sort of helping to make the circle work. It's like, okay, they asked me some questions, and now I can see that they heard me. And that encourages people to speak up more, to share more. And then I would say the third part of that is then actually act on some of those things. So where you really show people you listened is you heard them and you said, yes, we agree with you. Thank you for telling us that. we're going to do things differently because you told us. That really engenders that loyalty that causes that rinse and repeat cycle that you want. So,
but even just asking the question empowers people.
asking the question is a really good start, and maybe you don't have the power to change things. I guess I would also say, maybe don't ask questions
you can't
that you're absolutely unwilling to change. That's not exactly going to help engender a lot of loyalty if you're like, nope, we're never going to do that. But you want to get a sense. Sometimes people think of surveying as just collecting data for yourself, but I think in social, it is an important message to the audience that you care about them and you want their opinion, and that you want to share back what they've told you in aggregate, and here's the things you're going to do. I think that cycle, we've seen people have been very successful using that in social to build up a lot of loyalty, to the point where people start to look forward to the next survey, look forward to the next set of questions, because it's like, okay, well, what am I going to learn from this as a consumer about this product that I love, or this business or this service that I love?
One thing I've noticed you do in terms of encouraging people to do surveys, which maybe fits into this, is donating to charities.
Yeah, that's a little bit different product of ours, but yes, we have a product called SurveyMonkey Audience, where our customers can reach a demographically representative sample. And it's today just in the US. We're just about to launch it in Australia. And but in that, we ask respondents to take surveys for charity. But it has the same sort of notion of, we're creating kind of a voice for these people who want to participate in our community. In a way, it's kind of our community. And we're giving them value back in terms of a charitable donation to a charity that they care about. And that happens to work really well for us, because it gets us better quality data, because people aren't just doing it to make money. And it's great for them because people feel good about what they're doing, and they're also getting kind of contribute. People enjoy some of these. The surveys are interesting. It's like, hey, Procter & Gamble wants to ask you about a new product they're thinking about building. Well, if you're a customer of those type of products, giving your opinion there in a way where people are going to listen to it and act on it is really cool. And then when you see the product come out 6 months later, it's like, wow, I was part of that. Or an ad tested. So.
And talk about the fundamental shift from voice pre-social media to now social media.
Yeah, I mean, look, nothing is new. We've been doing all this stuff for a long time. The way in which we do it changes. So people have been speaking up. People used to have one-on-one conversation or group conversations, in a coffee house. Then people would get on talk radio. There's a lot of different ways in which people exercised this notion of voice. But social is just an incredibly empowering way for everybody to do it. And it's very scalable, and it's very easy, and it's very fast. That being said, there's also a lot more noise in that. And so I think, by making it easy and democratizing voice in some ways, right? Talk radio is voice, but there's like only a few people who get to speak up.
Right. And
someone selects them, and it's kind of curated. And in social, everybody has a chance to participate.
The output of a survey or getting voice at scale is data, big data.
Yeah.
A large theme these days. Your view on
Yeah.
the value of big data, is it meaningful? Is it not meaningful, even the term itself?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. It gets
wildly popular.
Wildly popular, misunderstood, overused. Look,
Are you a big data company?
Yes,
are you providing
we
big
are.
data?
But we look at what we're doing is providing effectively that voice of the customer at big data scale, right? That's kind of what's happening. We are the why, or how do you feel? And a lot of big data is the what's happening, without any of the whys or hows. And I think both are important. But like if you're running a business that you're doing, online e-commerce, for example, let's just take it. You've got a lot of data about how customers are coming to your site, what they're doing on the site. That's all this, what we would call implicit data. So you know what they're doing, but you don't know why they're doing it. And so we sort of think you need to marry the what with the why. That's how we run our business. Customers come to our site, they sign up, they start creating surveys. We see where they seem to be getting stuck, and then we ask them questions. Hey, what happened here? Why was this hard for you? What could we have done to make it better? And so we think of what we do as, there's lots of great tools on the implicit side. You need to also be explicit with people. If you
the explicit meaning that I'm not
just guessing. I'm asking that customer exactly why.
Why did you not buy? You put it in your basket. Why did you not buy?
Why did you not buy? Don't just guess. Ask them. And by the way, you get the loyalty benefit, the voice benefit by asking. So, we see just when we survey our customers, they're more engaged. We actually measure then on the implicit side, the customers we survey versus the customers we didn't. We do test and control. The customers, just the fact that we sent them a survey, tend to be more engaged with us, tend to be more interested in contributing on our socials channels. They're just more engaged because we showed them we cared.
What is the next phase for you and for the industry in terms of?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to go. We were 12 people 5 years ago when I joined. And my background's music, by the way, so I know a lot more about music than I do about surveys.
Hope you're sticking around for the weekend.
Unfortunately, I can't, but I'm glad I got to hear some music this morning. Look, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. Most of what people were doing before they got to SurveyMonkey was nothing. They weren't using a market research firm or another survey tool. They just weren't asking the question. And then the second and third choices were they were sending an email or a paper and pencil survey. So we're helping kind of create this market of voice, if you will. And there's a long way to go. And by the way, voice is not just with customers for us, it's also a lot internal. You want to ask your employees. The same thing I just said about customers is exactly true about your employees. Ask your employees. They want to feel empowered. They want to feel like they can contribute, that they have a voice. You don't want them exiting because they're unhappy. So the same thing, we're talking about more kind of social and marketing here, but it works for employees, and that's a big use case for us too. So we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of things sort of to do to kind of grow that market. It's a huge opportunity.
Okay, we have done a survey of Asia, 6 Asian countries.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go through a little
go
bit
to
of the
slides
findings.
here, if I can. Let's see what happens.
I think we'll get a slide up here.
There we go. All right.
So it was a survey among 6 countries: Hong Kong, China, Korea, Japan, Indonesia, and Singapore, looking at why people shared and what they were sharing. 2,508 people, roughly 400 people per market.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. We do a lot of work like this in the US. Obviously, we haven't done as much of it in Asia, and certainly had never done a cross-Asia thing. And I think one of the key takeaways, which we're showing here, is just there's a very big difference between culturally in sharing. China, Hong Kong, very active sharers. Japan, Korea, not as much. And so, and that difference existed in all the demographic groups as well. It was very much a cultural thing.
And speaking to Asia, this is really emblematic of the amount of sharing going on in China, in part due to the fact that traditional media doesn't really exist in the sense of being something that people trust and will have confidence in, which opened up this incredible channel. In the first phase was Sina Weibo in China, a fantastic platform for sharing broadly. Now WeChat has really taken over in a big way, which is going to be interesting to see the impact on sharing in China with these more closed style communities that are building up around these instant messaging apps, Line, WeChat, KakaoTalk.
Yeah. I think, different reasons why people share. We sort of see this, but certainly, want to provide information with people and feeling cool. And again, those varied by markets. We'll walk through that. And then they liked, obviously, things were informational and didn't like offensive posts, but people thought they saw too many ads.
With this, what we see is if you're showing things online, one of the conversations we often have about content with brands is that they need to understand that fundamentally, people aren't interested in your brand.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Exactly. You've got to find other ways to engage them.
You've got to get something that engages people,
Exactly.
and here you see it. It's either entertainment or utility that you have to bring on board in content that you're creating, which is a very important element of making something that is shareable. At the end of the day, what we want to do is make things that are so compelling that people are eager to share them, and utility and entertainment are two reasons for that.
Yeah, and we've got some kind of cool little open-ended things at the end that kind of show by market which brands were doing a good job of sort of feeling like they were content. It was very interesting. It was different. I think this is the sharing point. I think we're going to post all this so you guys can see all the slides.
You don't need to write down all the numbers.
We're going to, and there's a lot of data which we're not going to have time to share with here. But I think the distinct point here is just there's a real lack of sharing in Japan in particular. It was really shocking to me how little sharing, and that is a cultural thing.
Well, I think
a function of the tools people are using.
What that might have to do with is that Japan tends to be you have different cultures. Some of them are more identity-centric, and some are more interest-centric. And Japan is very much towards interest-centric. And I don't care who you are. I'm much more interested in what you do. And it goes back, I think, quite deeply into Japanese culture, where there is a great tradition of people wanting to build up mastery of doing something. And I don't care that you are a truck driver or a major TV personality. All I'm interested in is your ability to know how to cut a sushi well.
Yeah.
So it's very much an interest rather than identity-centric culture.
Yeah, when we just look at these, again, we don't actually have kind of the U.S. as a comparison here, but I would think that actually, interestingly, the U.S. would look a lot more like China and Hong Kong than Japan. I think Japan is the outlier probably on a global basis here. The reason people shared, this was interesting, this was fairly common across the board. It was, a couple things that sort of stick out here, but it's basically to kind of connect with people, which is not surprising. And it
Singapore being the standout in terms of it helps promote a certain cause or issue that I feel strongly about, as opposed to everyone else wanting to connect with people. So Singapore apparently wants to have causes.
And Indonesia was sort of there on causes as the other one, but then you can see everyone else, like China, Hong Kong, cause issues are not something that people want to get into online. Maybe that's sort of the government influence. But
reflection of,
And I think this was the other really interesting one for me is when are you going to share content? So in Japan, again, kind of the outlier, when you're bored. So they don't share very much. Maybe they're not bored that often.
Exciting times in Japan.
Or they're just not sharing, and they really share very frequently, and so it's like it's something to relieve the tedium. But it's a kind of it's sort of an interesting thing. And again, Hong Kong and China, when they're in a good mood, like it's fun, like social in those markets. Which
would push you towards the content that's more entertaining for China, Japan, that is something fun for people. Whereas if you have, Japan, Singapore, Korea, and Indonesia, newsworthiness, particularly in the case of Indonesia, is wildly important. So tagging something to something that's happening in the news could help you in terms of something
I think information that's interesting and newsworthy kind of will work everywhere, but in some of these other places like fun, certainly also matters. And then when are you going to share controversial content? And again, this is where it's most newsworthy for the most part. So we'll spend a long time on that. Okay, so these are the word clouds, and I think these were interesting. The question was, what brands make the most interesting content? So this was a content question.
Yeah, not surprisingly, a lot of the brands that turn up here are tech brands. They're being talked about. My Samsung phone, or Tudo is the largest video sharing platform. So it's not surprising they turn up.
Samsung was, I think there's probably someone from Samsung here. Samsung was the only one that showed up in every country.
So well done, Samsung.
The size of the word is the number of responses in that market scaled. So, so some of them are local brands, some of them are multinational brands. You've got kind of a mixture, but
And for this one, there are a couple of ones I'd highlight. Durex has one of the most creative teams in China for social. It's a very small team. They do it all in-house. There's about 5 or 6 of them, I think. And they're always coming up with very interesting content. They were using WeChat a little while ago to provide a wingman service, which was very much on message for what Durex's category is all about. So if you're out in Beijing and you're trying to figure out how do I talk to this girl, you go onto WeChat, and the crack team at Durex will give you the chat up lines.
Yeah. In Japan.
Whiskey.
Exactly. Whiskey.
Whiskey and Coke. Apparently the best combination.
Bigger brands, some of technology brands, but obviously some of the kind of more consumer electronics brands doing a lot, obviously local champions in Japan and those sort of things. You do see, again, some of the places where people go to get content. So people, I think, have a hard time distinguishing between brands that create content and brands that provide content. So YouTube, Yahoo, they're more places to go get the content as opposed to creating it. But it's interesting that people they blur the line for people.
Right.
Korea.
Samsung, not surprisingly.
Obviously big. But the other interesting thing, and we've aggregated government, there was a lot of different government agencies that were creating interesting content on social in Korea, and this was the only market where we saw government show up as something that's interesting. Obviously in Korea, not a lot of multinational brands.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Adidas is the
Adidas, Microsoft, Google.
Yeah, those are the exceptions, and they're pretty small. So very, very local brands, and not completely surprising in Korea. Singapore,
Apple interestingly didn't show up in a lot of the other markets. Very big here in Hong Kong. I wonder how many people have iPhones here? Many people have iPhones? As opposed to Samsung. Samsung is fairly similar size.
Yeah, but a lot more diversity in Singapore than maybe in Japan or Korea too. So Hong Kong, similar to Singapore in terms of a wide variety of multinational brands, not just technology brands.
But Facebook featuring largely, in that case, in the only market they had that scale.
Yeah.
Facebook has a huge penetration in Hong Kong, much higher than the United States. Virtually the entire population in Hong Kong is active on Facebook.
Yeah, and I think some of the differences we've seen by market are also a function of which platform people are deeply engaged with as well. So I think in Japan, and Line is pretty big these days. It's sort of ascendant. It's a very different kind of platform than Facebook or Twitter. So that has an impact on how people think about social.
Also, what's interesting in this one is Apple Daily, which is traditional media, which is featured a little bit throughout each of these slides, not very prominently. This is probably the biggest example of traditional media making a play, which is interesting for Apple Daily.
Yeah,
it's a very tabloid approach, something very shareable kind of content.
Yeah, it's been interesting. We haven't there wasn't a whole lot of traditional content publishers that were showing up. I mean, the closest thing was more sort of the first wave of digital publishers like Yahoo, but not the traditional media guys.
I think that's it.
Oh, that it? Oh, I thought I
that's
had
all
one
of our
more.
markets.
All right, no, I think we missed Indonesia somewhere, but look, I think we've got a lot more data that's in the survey. I think there's it's something that we haven't seen people look at social across Asia very much. I think this is probably one of the first studies that's been done in this regard.
At this scale, we didn't find any others, which is what prompted us to
do it in the first place. So I think I think it'll be also interesting to do it again and start to see what's changing.
Trends.
Right? Are these countries converging? Are we seeing as the platforms change? We're seeing the platforms try to converge, right? Twitter gets more like Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. Like as the platforms converge, do the countries converge, or do they retain their individual sort of identities because there's much more deeper cultural things? I don't think we know the answer there.
Well, one interesting trend that we're seeing that will be very interesting to look at going forward is with these instant messenger platforms, we're seeing much less public sharing.
Yeah.
And the equivalent in the sort of Western world would be Path, which is much more of a private sharing platform, which is where with WeChat, Line, KakaoTalk, it's going in terms of many markets. I was in Taiwan earlier this week, and Line is just taking off in a tremendous way, not just people buying stickers and sharing stickers, which is popular, but it's the way that they're doing sharing.
But they're doing content sharing, but it's just in a much smaller group.
It's in a much more smaller group, which reduces the scale of it. And the most dramatic effect of that we're seeing in Asia right now is Sina Weibo, switching from Sina Weibo being the major platform to WeChat being the major platform. And in fact, we're seeing a lot less public discussion taking place, in fact.
Yeah.
Sina Weibo was the first time in China that you would have at-scale conversations about issues happening in China due to government control of the media. With WeChat, people will tend to be sharing in their smaller circles rather than that broadcast element that Sina Weibo has, which is going to have an interesting effect going forward.
Yeah, and I think obviously kind of as we think about those brands that we just looked at, how they think about connecting in users in those more private settings is a little bit more of a challenge, right? It's a little bit more of a challenge to figure out how to insert yourself into those conversations.
It's a different kind of a skill set.
Yeah. So I think it'll be very interesting. I mean, I think, this whole space, social, it hasn't been around very long either. So we don't have. There's, 5 years from now, things are going to be really different. So sort of watching these trends over time, I think will be fascinating to see.
Great. Well, I would like to thank Dave Goldberg and SurveyMonkey for joining us here and taking part in this great survey, which, as we said, is unique. We did not find this. We decided we wanted to do a survey, tried to figure out what it was. It turned out nobody's looking at content across these Asian markets. We will be sharing all of this data, so please take a look at it. And thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That's right.